My name is Daniel Morrow. I'm 44 years old. I've lived in Harlan County my whole life, and I've worked maintenance at Grace Lutheran on Route 119 for going on 11 years. I want to say that up front, because people who hear this kind of story always want to know who is telling it, and whether they're the kind of person who goes looking for this. I am not. I go to church. I fix the boiler. I replace the fluorescent tubes in the fellowship hall when they go. I am exactly as ordinary as that sounds. Grace Lutheran was built in 1887. It sits on a 2-lane county road about 6 miles outside of town. White clapboard steeple, 6 stained glass windows on each side, a gravel parking lot that needs regrading every spring, and a cemetery outback that predates the church by at least 30 years. The congregation is 60 people on a good Sunday. Pastor Wells has been there longer than I have. Good man, quiet, the kind of pastor who listens more than he talks. I always respected that about him. My hours are early. I come in Monday through Friday around 7, before anyone else. Let myself in with my key, do what needs doing, and I'm usually out by noon. For the first 8 years, that was exactly what it was. An empty building, a quiet job, the specific satisfaction of old things, kept in working order. The first thing happened in March 2019. I was replacing a section of baseboard in the hallway behind the sanctuary, the narrow hallway that runs from the vestibule to the pastor's office and the Sunday school rooms at the back. I was on my knees with a pry bar, and I heard from inside the sanctuary the sound of someone sitting down in one of the pews. That specific creak, the sound of old oak accepting a body's weight. I have been hearing that sound in churches my entire life. You do not mistake it for anything else. I got up and looked through the door that connects the hallway to the sanctuary. 8 rows of pews on each side, the center aisle, the altar. Nobody. The front door was still locked. No other cars in the lot when I'd pulled in. I went back to the baseboard. I told myself all the things you tell yourself. Old building, temperature change, wood settling in the morning cold. I made it 4 minutes before it happened again. Same pew, same weight-accepting creak. This time followed by a slow exhalation of breath that the building absolutely should not have been able to produce. Low, almost like a sigh. Patient. I put down the pry bar and left. I didn't tell anyone. I wrote it off as best I could and kept showing up, the way you do when you need the work and the work is otherwise good. The sound came back occasionally over the spring, always in the mornings, always from the same general area. The right side, somewhere in the middle rows. I started doing the baseboard hallway last instead of first. I'm not proud of this, but I learned to work around it. The second thing happened in June. I was trimming around the headstones in the cemetery on a Wednesday morning, sunny, hot, working my way toward the older section at the back, where the stones are mossy and some of them have tipped over. The graves going back to the 1840s. I came around the back corner of the church building, and there was a woman standing at the far edge of the cemetery, at the old iron fence that marks where the church property ends and the woods begin. Her back was to me, in dark dress. Long, the kind you wear to a funeral. Dark hair loose to her shoulders. Standing at the fence, looking into the trees. I assumed she was visiting a grave. We get those occasionally. I called out. She didn't respond. I called again, louder. She didn't move at all, not a flinch, not a turn of the head, nothing. I started walking toward her. I was maybe 30 feet out when she was gone. Not walked away, not stepped through the fence. Gone, between one step and the next. 30 feet in open morning daylight, and there was simply no one there. The ground at the fence was soft from rain 2 days before. I went and looked. No footprints. Not one. just the undisturbed soft ground, and the fence and the trees on the other side, doing what trees do. I told Pastor Wells that afternoon. He listened to me the whole way through without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment in a way that felt less like he was thinking and more like he was choosing what not to say. Then he told me I wasn't the first person who had seen something at that fence. He didn't say what other people had seen, and I didn't ask. In small towns, some things stay in the shape that they've always been in. But there was something in the way he said it that stayed with me. Not surprise, not concern. Something closer to recognition, like a man acknowledging something he has long since accepted as part of the landscape. I kept that in mind in October when the third thing happened, Tuesday morning standard rounds. I went into the sanctuary to replace a burned-out bulb in the sconce fixture on the right wall about halfway down. Stepladder, bag of supplies. I set up under the fixture and climbed up and reached for the dead bulb, and I looked down and stopped. On the floor below the third pew from the front on the right side, not on the pew itself, on the floor beneath it, there was a handprint, palm flat against the floorboards, fingers spread wide, full contact, the kind of print you make when you press a hand deliberately against a surface with your full weight behind it. I climbed down and crouched next to it. I looked at it for a long time. The handprint was oriented wrong. The fingers were pointing toward the back of the church, toward the door, toward the way out. The palm was toward the altar. It was the handprint of something, kneeling in that pew, with their hand behind them pressed flat against the floor and pointing toward the exit, the way you might press a hand out behind you to feel for what's behind you in the dark, or the way something kneeling at the altar might press its hand to the floor to feel the building beneath it. I did not finish replacing the bulb that morning. I cleaned the print with the floor cleaner I keep in the supply closet. I packed up my ladder, and I sat in my truck in the gravel parking lot for 20 minutes before I drove home. The part that I think about most is this. The building is locked every night by Pastor Wells at 9 p.m. I arrive and unlock it at 7 a.m. Whatever made that print was inside the building in the 10 hours it was locked. Not coming in after me, already there. Waiting maybe. Or just there the way it's always there. Doing whatever it does in that building in the dark. Sitting in the pews, standing at the fence, pressing its hand against the floor and pointing toward the door. And leaving me the evidence because it either wants me to know or simply doesn't care whether I do. I have replaced a lot of bulbs since October 2019. I do not look at the floor under the third pew on the right when I do it. That is the accommodation I have made. Pastor Wells retired last year. His replacement is a young man from Lexington who grew up in a suburb and has never worked in a building with this kind of history. I have been working for him for 8 months. He hasn't noticed anything yet. I don't know if that's because there is nothing to notice or because it is decided he is not worth noticing. I find myself hoping for the former. I have a feeling it's the latter. My name is Renata Voss. I'm 38, born and raised in New Braunfels. And for 6 years, I was the parish administrator at St. Augustine of Hippo Catholic Church on 2nd Avenue. I left that job in the spring of last year. What happened there is why I left, though it took me an embarrassingly long time to admit that to myself, because I am not a person who runs from things, and I did not want to become one. St. Augustine is a beautiful church. I want to say that clearly because I loved that building with a specific and genuine love, and I would hate for what I'm about to describe to be the whole story of what it was to be there. Built in 1928 in the Texas Hill Country German Catholic tradition, 2-foot-thick limestone walls, arched windows with original jewel-tone stained glass, a bell tower you can see from the highway, a walled courtyard with a garden the Women's Guild has tended for 90 years. The inside? Dark-stained oak pews, the Stations of the Cross in painted tile set into the limestone walls, the altar in white marble, the gold tabernacle, the specific quality of light in a room built for both stone and colored glass, the way the afternoon sun comes through the reds and blues at around 3 p.m. and makes the floor look like it's on fire. I have spent years in that room, and I can still feel exactly what that light looked like. My office was in the parish hall attached to the back of the church. I kept late hours, council meetings, religious education nights, choir rehearsals, the general sprawl of keeping a working parish organized. It was not unusual for me to be the last person in the building on any given weeknight, locking up at 9 or 9:30. I knew the building the way you know a place you've been going to since childhood and then work in as an adult. Not just the layout, but its sounds, its temperature rhythms, the way it felt different on a Tuesday at 8 p.m. than it did on a Sunday at 10 a.m. The sound started in the fall of my second year, November 2018. 3 or 4 times a week I would be working late and hear from the main nave, from the large dark space of the church itself, closed off from the hall where my office was, the sense of movement. Not footsteps exactly, something more ambient than that. The quality of a large space that has been still being disturbed. The specific acoustic difference between a room that is empty and a room that contains something moving through it, something that displaces the air. I would stop and listen. It would stop. I would look through my courtyard window at the side door of the church. Closed. I would go check. Empty. I told myself what everyone tells themselves. Old building. Limestone contracts differently than wood. Texas heat on old stone. The things I told myself became harder to apply in February 2019. Thursday night, after religious education, I'd seen the last families out and locked up the hall and was finishing my end-of-night paperwork. I heard from the courtyard, the open-air courtyard between the hall and the church, the garden with its gravel paths and its small stone grotto at the far corner, with the Mary statue. I heard from there the sound of a woman crying, not ambiguously, not in a way I had to work to identify. A woman crying, the specific involuntary quality of someone trying to keep it quiet and not entirely succeeding. The sound of grief that has been held for a long time and is briefly coming loose, right there in the courtyard, 10 feet from my office window. I looked through the window. The security light over the courtyard showed me the garden, the gravel paths, the statue in the grotto, the locked side door of the church. No one. I went outside. I walked the full courtyard. I checked behind the grotto walls. I checked the church side door. Locked. No one. But in the grotto at the base of the Mary statue, a red votive candle was burning. Not there at 8 that morning when I arrived. Burning now. In the grotto where I had just heard a woman crying, a candle lit by a hand I did not see at a time I cannot account for. I blew out the candle. I did not sleep well that night. The thing that made me leave happened in April 2020 during COVID lockdown, when the church was closed to the public and I was coming in alone 2 or 3 times a week to handle essential administrative work. The building without its congregation is a different building. I knew that. What I did not know until lockdown was how much the congregation's presence had been. I want to choose this word carefully. Masking something. Filling the space with enough living presence that the other presence went unnoticed, or was simply outnumbered, with the church empty of its people and me the only person inside. Whatever occupied that building did not bother to stay quiet. I was walking through the nave to get something from the sacristy on a Tuesday afternoon, midday. The colored light at its most present, the reds and blues on the floor. I had been alone in the building for 2 hours. There was no question of another key, no question of an unlocked entrance I had missed. I knew the building. I checked every time. In the last pew on the right side, the very back pew against the interior west wall, a woman was sitting. Dark clothing, dark hair, facing the altar, completely still. I said, "The church is closed. We are not taking visitors right now." She did not respond. I walked down the side aisle toward her. I kept walking until I reached the back pew, and I looked directly at it, and it was empty. An empty pew in a church I had been alone in for 2 hours. I stood there for a long time. The light moving on the floor, the tabernacle gold at the altar, the empty pew. When I told Father Sandoval, he nodded slowly in a way that made my stomach drop. Then he said, "She has been reported before," with the specific calm of a man describing a known condition. "She's been reported before," he said. "She has never hurt anyone. She has been here as long as anyone can remember." He said it with the same quiet acceptance you would use to describe the boiler's tendency to rattle in January. I worked at St. Augustine for 2 more years after that conversation. I want to be honest about why. Partly stubbornness, partly genuine love for the work in the community, and partly because whatever Father Sandoval had accepted as part of the fabric of the building made me feel that I should be capable of accepting it too. That faith should be big enough to hold this. Maybe it is for some people. What I could not hold was the specific feeling after the conversation with Father Sandoval of knowing she was there and knowing she had always been there and knowing that the institution had absorbed her as a known quantity and moved on. The woman in the last pew of a locked church, reported before, never hurt anyone. She has been here as long as anyone can remember. I do not know how to sit comfortably inside the category of things a church has simply absorbed and moved on from. I submitted my resignation that April. Father Sandoval thanked me for my service. He did not ask why I was leaving. I think he already knew. My name is Sylvia Crane. I'm 61 years old. I live in Aldenmore, Vermont, and I was the organist at First Congregational Church of Aldenmore for 22 years. I retired from the position 3 years ago. The reason I gave the congregation was that it was time. The reason I am giving you now is the truth, and the truth is considerably more difficult to say out loud than I expected it to be when I decided to say it. First Congregational is the oldest standing structure in Aldenmore. The original building went up in 1739. That is not a typo, that is 285 years ago. The current structure is the third on the same foundation, rebuilt in 1891 after a fire. White clapboard with black shutters and the steeple that photographs as the definitive image of a New England hill town, because it is exactly that. The organ is a 1903 Hutchings Vody pipe organ, the original instrument for the 1891 building, maintained and in full working order. Playing that instrument was the finest musical experience of my professional life. I want that stated plainly and without qualification before I tell you anything else. The job of a church organist is a job of solitude. People outside the profession don't understand this. You arrive before the congregation for practice. You stay after for choir rehearsal. You come on weekday afternoons to prepare the following Sunday's music. In a Vermont church with a heating system that has been charitably described as inadequate, the organist also arrives early enough on Sunday mornings to have the building at a survivable temperature before the congregation gets there, which in January means arriving at 6:30 for a 9 a.m. service. I have been alone in that building in the dark at 6:30 on a Sunday morning in January more times than I can count. The dark outside, the windows still full, and the building slowly coming up to temperature around me, and the organ pipes warming up, and the chancel lights on, and the rest of the building in dark. I noticed it the first winter. I was 21 years old, first year of the position. January Sunday morning. I was playing through the prelude for the service, and I heard from the rear balcony above and behind me, the balcony where the original 1891 box pews are, the pews that have been closed to the congregation since the 1960s. Footsteps, slow and clear. The sound of someone walking across the old balcony floor from the left side to the right side, not rushing, not sneaking. Walking at a measured pace the full width of the balcony, every step producing the specific creak of very old boards under weight. I was 21. I closed the fallboard over the keys, collected my things, and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot until another parishioner arrived, and I went back inside with them. I said nothing to anyone. By my third year, the footsteps had become something I worked around, rather than fled from. They were consistent in their pattern. Sunday mornings in the early hours, occasionally on weekday afternoons, when I was alone in the building. Always the same path across the balcony, always the same measured pace, always stopping somewhere in the middle of the right side and not resuming. I cannot explain why that stopping point is the most unsettling part of the pattern to me. Something about the consistency of where it chose to stop. What I did not adjust to was the organ. I need to explain something about pipe organs before I continue. Ciphers happen. A cipher is when a note sounds that shouldn't. A pipe stuck open, a faulty pallet valve, a mechanical failure in a system with thousands of moving parts. A cipher is a single sustained note. Continuous. Stuck. It is immediately identifiable as a mechanical problem because it is a single note being held by air pressure rather than intention, and it sounds exactly like that. I have dealt with ciphers my entire career. I know what they sound like. I know them the way a plumber knows the sound of a pipe that has pressure on it and shouldn't. What happened at First Congregational was not a cipher. On 3 separate occasions across my 22 years, my 9th year, my 15th year, and my 20th year, I arrived at the church on a weekday afternoon and heard the organ playing as I came through the door. Not ciphering, playing a melody, a single voice unhurried on the swell manual at moderate volume, filling the nave with the specific warm tone of pipes that have been voiced for that room for over a century. A complete melodic line, coherent, intentional, moving through its phrases in a way that demonstrated knowledge of the instrument and knowledge of the piece. The same piece all 3 times, across 11 years. I recognized it eventually after the second occurrence. An 18th century American psalm tune, one of the early congregational hymn tunes from the colonial period. The kind of music that would have been sung in this building before the fire, before the 1891 rebuild, before the Hutchings Vody organ, before most of the congregation's grandparents were born. Old music, native to this ground, playing itself back in the instrument that currently occupied the space where older instruments had stood. The first time I stood in the doorway and listened, the playing stopped after approximately 4 minutes. I searched the building. I was alone. The console unoccupied. The stop knobs drawn in the specific combination that would produce the sound I'd heard. Someone had pulled the stops and played the instrument and gone, leaving the stops drawn. The second time I recorded it on my phone. I have not shared that recording. I've thought about it. Every time I think I'm ready, I find I'm not, for reasons I can't entirely articulate. Something about the recording feels private in a way I don't know how to override. It exists. That is enough for me to know. The third time, in my 20th year, I stood in the doorway and listened and made a decision. I would finish my tenure, 2 more years, every Sunday, every Christmas Eve, every Easter, and I would leave gracefully and I would tell no one why. I kept that commitment. I gave that congregation 2 more years of everything I had. I need to tell you about the last Sunday. It was my final service. I had chosen the music carefully. The last piece was Widor's Toccata from the Fifth Symphony, the piece that fills the space like nothing else I know, the piece that uses every resource of a large instrument and gives them all back to the room at once. I had played it in that building many times over 22 years. I knew exactly what it sounded like in that acoustic. I got to the final section, the return of the main theme, and the organ did something it had never done. The swell box, the shutters that enclose the swell pipes and control their volume when opened and closed, opened. Not because I operated the swell shoe, not because of a mechanical failure. The swell box opened on its own, gradually, over about 12 bars of music, the sound swelling to full and open. I felt the swell shoe under my foot. I had not moved it. It was not moving. The box was opening by itself. The sound of the Widor in that room at full swell on that final Sunday was the most extraordinary thing I have ever heard that instrument do. The congregation was on their feet before the piece was finished. They thought I had done it. I did not do it. I sat at the bench after the service with my hands in my lap for a long time. The congregation had gone to coffee hour. The nave was empty. The colored light on the floor, the old wood, the pipes in their cases. I said thank you out loud to the empty room. I don't know who I was thanking. I've thought about this often in the 3 years since. I think I was thanking whatever was in that building for 22 years of being nearby without being harmful, for the footsteps that walked their measured path and stopped in the same place every time, never coming down the stairs, for the music that played itself back on the instrument and left the stops drawn for me to find, for whatever opened the swell on the last day. There are things in old places, things that don't know how old they are, maybe, or don't care, things that have been listening to 280 years of Sunday mornings in that particular room and have become somehow part of what the room is. I am a practical woman. I do not say this kind of thing easily. I am saying it because it is the most accurate description I have of what I experienced in 22 years in that building. The current organist called me last spring. She said she was hearing footsteps in the balcony on Sunday mornings. She said she had checked and there was nobody up there. I told her there never was. She asked me if I knew what it was. I told her I didn't. I told her it had been there the whole time I was there and that it had never once come down the stairs. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I thought it was dangerous. I thought about the swell opening on the last Sunday, the sound filling the room on its own. I told her no. I told her it seemed to like the music. She said that was the strangest comfort she had ever been offered. I told her I knew. I told her it was the best I had.